So if you didn't already know, this video is part of a new series on my channel in which I just take a couple of minutes each and every single week to talk about something, anything really, that I really want to talk about. Because in reality, this whole YouTube thing is kind of a glorified hobby for me at this point, and it really helps me decompress and clear my head of all this, oh, wouldn't that be awesome? What if this happened? That would be totally cool, and I would totally do it this way type of stuff. And since I have a decent sized audience on this channel now, I thought it would be a good time to try to flex my creative muscles and try something completely different. That's why today we're going to be talking about Star Wars! Okay. Full disclosure now, I wouldn't consider myself a true fan of the Star Wars saga. And by that, I mean I'm not one of those toxic gatekeeping assholes who has built their entire media presence on shaming others for liking certain content or not having the time to keep up with things in the extended universe worth of material. Anyway, with that being said, today we're going to be talking about Star Wars. More specifically, this will be a continuation of the conversation started within the first video of this series, where we discussed Disney's apprehension in tackling the main creative hurdles that came with the reintroduction of the Star Wars canon into the mainstream consciousness, both as a continuation of the original trilogy, as well as continuing the story that contained very little, if any, remaining narrative thrust for even simply existing, besides, well, you know, nostalgia. I ended that original conversation with a tease of how the story would have been told or better suited for a story set between 5 or 6 films, and today I wanted to do my best to outline what I meant by that statement, at least when it comes to the first of those 2 trilogies. I mean, seriously, doing any more than that would be way too long of a video, plus this gives me extra reason to go back and discuss this if this video does well enough. But nevertheless, it is my firm belief that Disney's reintroduction of the Star Wars saga with The Force Awakens was a big first mistake in the entire trilogy. Despite what you might even believe about that film, it's undeniable that the story was meant to serve as somewhat of a nostalgic sequel, bringing back nearly every single main player from the original trilogy, and a soft reboot that introduced audience to the new cast of characters. And in order to balance this daunting task, the creative minds in charge chose to echo the same plot points from A New Hope in order to make the new film feel approachable to both new fans domestically and internationally as possible, while also doing their best to honor the old fans that came before. And for me, that's the worst thing about episode 7. I know the series is called Star Wars, but isn't it kind of strange that we haven't yet seen any cinematic offering of this entire galaxy far, far away that isn't marred in the travesties of war? And possibly teeing up a story that introduces audience to Rey, a scavenging orphan in a desolate desert planet somewhere in the far side of the galaxy, and taking the first 15 minutes or so to show us how self-sufficient and calculated she really has become in order to survive this harsh world. And maybe making him a little bit more like Aladdin in his thievery aspects, at least for the beginning of the movie. But suddenly all hell breaks loose as she's quickly swept up into a high-speed spaceship chase that makes its way through her little village all the way to the wreckage of the old Empire ships that collect dust on the outskirts of the city. And the ship that's being chased at the beginning of the movie is the Millennium Falcon. And then we sideswipe in classic Star Wars fashion to a bunch of gangster-like aliens and humans searching the town for 2 nerf herders who stole something from their boss. They even rough up a bunch of the citizens from the town, but nobody knows what happened to the ship. So here we are, both the audience and Rey, armed with the knowledge of her familiarity with the surrounding area and the curiosity of the entire situation. So naturally, she would go searching for the Millennium Falcon. And that's where she meets Han Solo and Chewie within the movie. Just 2 old guys up to their old tricks deep in some new crime syndicate somewhere in the far edge of the galaxy. And then we get to see Rey convince them to let her join because she proves useful in the current situation, and the group is forced to travel across the galaxy in order to pay off the debt that Han has gotten himself into. This setup, at least to me, would allow the story to not only focus on Rey's Force sensibility, but also reintroduce Leia to the audience as well as reintroducing Anakin's lightsaber to the mix and hinting at concerns of the growing fascist movement known as the First Order. As far as the film's B story is concerned, because we're dealing with a nostalgic sequel, it would be really interesting to delve a little bit into Luke Skywalker and his training of Han and Leia's son, Ben Solo. This would have given the audience a chance to see Ben's character be swayed to the dark side, perhaps by hearing Vader's voice and maybe even Snoke's voice within his head in order to set up what was going to be coming later in the future. And this would also give us a little bit of information into Luke's struggle to curb his nephew's darker thoughts. And maybe with a naive personal impression of everything that happened from the first trilogy, Luke believes that he can turn Ben away from the dark side. But at the end of the first film, we get to see Leia fully sense her son's fall into the dark side, as well as Rey's Jedi potential. And this could have perfectly led us into the second film of the trilogy that focused on the rise of the First Order, as we finally got introduced to Finn, Captain Phasma, General Hux, and Snoke himself. Because this is the second film in the franchise, we can take a little time to focus on Ben's seduction into the dark side, as he turns against Luke's training, kills maybe a couple of young Padawans, and searches for the voices within his head. Ultimately, this leads him to Snoke, who promises him that he's the heir apparent to his own grandfather. In the meantime, this is all happening after Leia has sent Rey to train under Luke. But by the time that she gets to him, he is emotionally broken by the failures to having not stopped Ben and thinking that he could have converted him from the dark side into the light the same way he did his own father. As such, he refuses to train Rey, and she has to try to convince him throughout the rest of the movie. This would have allowed us to get the same emotionally distant and cynical Luke Skywalker that we got from The Last Jedi, but with the added benefit of seeing his failures play out in real time, so the wound is still a little bit fresh. The rest of the movie would have focused on Rey trying to argue with Luke in order to train her, but Luke seeing that her powers constantly shift towards the dark side in a similar way to Ben's, and he is reluctant to do so because of what just happened. And if it were up to me, or if I had any say in doing this entire trilogy over again, I would have to say that an idea that I would definitely keep is the connection between Rey and Ben and the Force dyad, because it's a great way to contrast the two as the rest of the series plays out. It's through that connection that we would understand Rey's knowledge of what Ben was up to during the events of the film and his journey towards Snoke and the First Order. The film's C-plot would have focused on Leia, Han, and Chewie as they dealt with the growth of the First Order and the introduction of the new super weapon that aims to destroy some of the key governmental outposts across the galaxy. Ultimately, this would come to a head with Rey rebuffing Luke's worries and traveling to the Starkiller base in order to help Ben try to find his way to the light side. Meanwhile, we also have Han and Chewie leading the Resistance mission in order to take out the Starkiller base and bring back Ben to Leia. It's in that plotting that Han and Chewie meet Poe, as well as the audience, and the entire group meets up with Finn and he gets them into the Starkiller base and just all that other stuff, because that kind of totally makes sense and it's how everything would work in general, and that serves as a great D-plot of the entire story, but I get ahead of myself. Anyway, all of those stories would come together at the very end of the movie as everybody gets to the Starkiller base, and the Starkiller base is used to destroy all of these government outposts before being destroyed on the inside, kind of like A New Hope and The Return of the Jedi. And as that planet is blowing up, we get to see Ben fully seduced by the dark side by killing his father Han Solo and becoming officially Kylo Ren. And this is really the first time that we get to see Rey and Ben interact in real life, as she tries to attack him for what he did to her friend, but because he is so much more trained than her in the ways of the Force, he simply dispatches her, throwing her off into the distance and going about his way. It's here that we have Rey saved from planetary destruction by Finn, as he brings her back to the Falcon in order to join Chewie and Poe as they lead the remaining part of the Resistance fighters away from the doomed planet. The film then ends with Rey seriously injured as Ben creates his Kylo Ren mask and bows to Supreme Leader Snoke as the First Order forces their way throughout the entire galaxy. And that leads us to the third outing of this trilogy that continues the Force dyad connection between Rey and Ben as Rey recovers from her injuries and once again tries to get Luke to train her for the upcoming fight. But still, Luke refuses as he senses this dark side within Rey. And as Luke is trying to deal with this situation, whether he should accept training someone or not, we get to see Ben doing a lot of Vader-like stuff as we learn even more about Snoke and his connection into the dark side. But despite Ben's conviction from the last film, we see him struggling with the decision that he made in order to kill his father to bring him fully to the dark side and whether or not he can be turned. And because of the Force dyad, Rey and Ben are both sensing each other, and she sees that he is in fact a redeemable person. The rest of the film could have dealt with the supreme rise of the First Order and the reintroduction of the Resistance, built on the legacy of Han, Luke, and Leia and everything that came with the original trilogy. It could have focused on Ben and Poe, but not really given them leadership roles because they had to age into it, and we also had spots open to reintroduce older characters like Lando back into the canon. And by the end of this film, after all the training and forcing from Luke Skywalker, we could have seen Rey and Ben yet again come to blows, but this time we get to see Rey gain the upper hand because of a sacrifice from Leia as she projects herself, or maybe even Han Solo, into Ben's mind. And this causes just enough of a delay in order to give Rey an upper hand in the fight and make sure that she beats Ben at least this time. And it's that very first win that Rey has over Ben that gives the Resistance enough push to have the first win over the First Order and sets us up for the second trilogy of this series. All in all, this would kind of end the first trilogy with a major win for the good guys while also leaving enough room for the new guys and girls enough to make their mark on the franchise without really focusing on the old guard of characters. That's what the first sequel trilogy really should have been about if nostalgia had anything to do with it, giving Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford enough time to shine in the characters that everyone knew and loved and give them a proper send-off before focusing on these new characters. That's something that would have appeased the old fans while giving the new fans something to look forward to for future movies. Look, I know that this isn't the most articulate explanation for what the first Disney sequel trilogy should have been, but for me, this is the story that I would have rather seen because it would have allowed enough time to allow the old guard of characters to pass the torch to the next generation. And it would have allowed us as the audience to see, just briefly, the world of Star Wars outside of the ravages of war. And honestly, it would have given Disney enough time to tell a story that more people would have been happier with over the last 5 years. And I believe this entire trilogy would have been far more celebrated if it went somewhere in this direction over the last couple years instead of what they ended up doing. But as far as where this story would go after this theoretical exercise, well, I'm not really sure. Honestly, I haven't thought of it that much, and if you guys react to this in a certain way, maybe I will sit down and come up with a much more broad explanation of how this entire sequel trilogy could have gone. But until then, this has just been a real take. I've been throwing out ideas and I just wanted to put it out there because I still want to talk about Star Wars after The Rise of Skywalker, and I know a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that movie. I want everyone to share them in the comment section below. I also want everyone to go down, subscribe, hit that bell over by the subscriber button to notify you every single time I upload, because I will be dropping more videos like this, hopefully once a week, if not more so. Hope everyone's having a fantastic day. It's been real.